Centre 咧就請咗 Dr. Kiran 啦，就為我哋講 Embracing Cultural Diversity in Hospitals。咁呢個 topic 當然就係非 Dr. Kiran 講噶啦。咁 Dr. Kiran 咧自己就生長喺一個印度家庭啦，咁佢好努力啦，喺香港入咗醫學院啦，而家仲做埋我哋兒童醫院嘅兒科醫生啦。咁相信條路一定係唔容易嘅，一陣可以等 Dr. Kiran 再 share 下。咁所以由佢嚟講，即係ethnic minorities 啊，喺醫院嘅 setting 啊，點樣我哋可以點樣幫到呢啲人係即係最理想不過噶啦。咁講下 Dr. Kiran 啦，其實 Dr. Kiran 咧做呢一個喺醫院裏邊做 ethnic minority 工作咧，唔係就係今時今日啦。其實佢係2004年已經開始做緊呢個工作。咁佢亦都咧喺2005年到2018年咧，就喺 COME project 咧係一個喺醫院 base 嘅叫 Care Optimization for Minor Ethnic Patient Group 嘅工作裏邊呢，即係做咗好多嘢啦。亦都咧去到2016年到2018年，佢亦都係個 chairperson 喺新界西有個 committee，就係做 diverse ethnicities 嘅工作嚟嘅。咁亦都喺呢方面咧，Dr. Kiran 攞咗好多獎啊，亦都好多人邀請佢去 seminar、HA convention 啊，都分享過好多關於呢方面嘅知識啦，點樣可以幫到呢啲人啦。咁我今日好啦，今日咧就輪到 Sim Centre， 我哋好有幸終於請到 Dr. Kiran 咧，就為我哋再講多少少一啲喺醫院嘅 setting 嘅工作，點樣可以幫到啲 ethnic minorities。咁我哋而家將個時間交翻俾 Dr. Kiran 啦。
Good afternoon, everybody. For the ease of the flow of the presentation, I'm going to use English, and I'd like to thank Carrie for giving me such a wonderful introduction. And I'm just going to be having a few disclosures to make. Just like Carrie said, that I've actually been working on enhancing cultural diversity in hospitals since 2004, basically since I started becoming a medical officer. This tells you how young I am, actually. But apart from that, I've also been the chairperson of the Committee of the Service for Diverse Ethnicities. And during the course of this presentation, I will be presenting some of the extremely good work that the committee and its members have done for ethnic minorities in the New Territories West Cluster. And I have sought permission from them for this presentation or presenting some of the extremely good work. So before we go on to talk a little bit about embracing cultural diversity, I think it is very important to know your client. Now, know your client, which is KYC, is a very, very common thing in corporate worlds and even at banks. And that's why I think the first question that we need to really answer is that we need to know the ethnic minorities we are dealing with. And after we know the ethnic minorities we are dealing with, we actually need to know what is already available in HA. And, you know, once we know what is already available in HA, we can perhaps know a little bit about the basics or more in-depth about the cultures and traditional practices of the ethnic minorities we are dealing with. Only then will we be able to further improve service provision for them. And actually the outline of my lecture is going to be based on these 4 points. So let's start with knowing the ethnic minorities we are dealing with. So actually I'm going to refer to the 2016 bi-census report, which actually has a subsection on ethnic minorities. And according to the 2016 bi-census report, actually more than 500,000 of our population belong to ethnic minorities, which is forming about 8% of the total population. And actually, when we compare to 2006, the number of ethnic minorities living in Hong Kong has actually increased by 71%. That's a very huge jump. And apart from that, you know, when we talk about which ethnic minorities are the most common in Hong Kong, obviously it is Filipinos, Indonesians, followed by South Asians. Now, when we, like I told you, that the number of ethnic minorities living in Hong Kong have been increasing over the past decade or 2 decades. And as you can see, in 2006, ethnic minorities only formed 5% of the total population, and they had already become 8% of the total population by 2016, which basically means that 1 in 10 people you meet are going to be belonging to ethnic minorities. So in healthcare, we are bound to run into them. So after we know this, the second point I want to make is that the percentage of ethnic minority population in Hong Kong. So as we know, the majorities are Filipinos and Indonesian, and they usually belong to the foreign domestic helper category. And then we also have Caucasians, which belong to the expat category. When we look at South Asian, we are actually talking about 3 different communities. And when you look at South Asian people, we actually are dealing with majority Indian, Nepalese, and Pakistanis. And actually, if we look at the Bicensus report, about 14% of all ethnic minorities are born in Hong Kong. So 80,000 of them were actually born in Hong Kong. So they are no different from any other person that we meet who's born in Hong Kong and have the same rights. From this 14%, actually a majority of them belong to the South Asian community in comparison to Caucasians, Filipinos, or Indonesians. So when we look at this, after we know that there are so many ethnic minorities living in Hong Kong, we have to look at where they're living. And actually, I think we all know where they're living. Recent headlines have told us a lot already. But you can see that when we compare 2006 to 2016, the trend has been moving away from Hong Kong Island and has actually been moving towards Kowloon and New Territories. And in 2016 already, the most populated area with ethnic minorities was area number 14, which is no doubtly the Yau Chim Mong district, which has been heavily in the news in the past few days. And actually, if you look at it in 2006, if you exclude foreign domestic helpers, majority of the population was living in Hong Kong side and now is living in Yau Chim Mong. So this basically tells you the dynamics of ethnic minorities, which has been changing. Probably the expat population is moving back, and we are having more and more ethnic minority people who are moving in or who are born in Hong Kong. And actually in Yau Chim Mong district itself, the number of ethnic minorities has actually more than doubled in the past decade. So from just being 4% living in Yau Chim Mong district, 9.1% are now living in Yau Chim Mong district. And Yau Chim Mong district actually falls under our Kowloon Central Cluster, and where Hong Kong Children's Hospital also belongs in the Yau Chim Mong district. So we know where they're living. So what about a little bit more about their characteristics? So we'll start by education, because education tends to basically determine their job and their socioeconomic background quite a bit. So if you can look at the education characteristics of ethnic minorities, majority of them don't have any difference in primary schools, kindergartens, and even secondary schools. The major difference between ethnic minorities and the whole population comes in the tertiary education sector. You can see that less than 1/3 of them actually achieve any tertiary education, when compared to about half of the whole population which achieves tertiary education. Without tertiary education, no doubtly, they mostly end up doing elementary unskilled jobs. So actually, if you compare to the whole population, ethnic minorities, 75% of them tend to end up doing elementary jobs. Now, you may argue with me that this figure is so high because we are including foreign domestic helpers. So let's exclude the Filipinos and let's exclude the Indonesian helpers. If you look at just the South Asian population, even if I remove the other foreign domestic helper category, still almost 40% of them are only doing elementary job, which is double of our whole population. And obviously, if they're going to do elementary jobs, no doubtedly their annual or their median monthly income is going to be much lower than our general population. And so when we look at ethnic minorities, they usually tend to belong to lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think the other very important characteristic that I want to talk about is the language spoken. Because language is the main basis of communication with them, which is an integral part of providing healthcare for them. So actually, if you look at Filipinos, Indonesian, and Caucasians, surprisingly, more than 70% of them either speak Cantonese or English, which is most of the time, most of our population speak those two languages. And so we can easily communicate with Filipinos, Indonesians, and Caucasians. It is the South Asian population in which only 6% speak Cantonese and only 23% speak English. So we tend to have huge difficulty when communicating with the South Asian group of ethnic minority. And I'm sure those working in the hospitals already know that this is actually a major problem we face. So in summary, from the statistics that I've just mentioned, is that the population of ethnic minority in Hong Kong is definitely rising, and we are bound to encounter ethnic minorities while we provide healthcare. Many ethnic minorities have at most achieved secondary education. They have poor economic background, and a proportion of them don't speak Cantonese or English. And actually, when I talk to a lot of ethnic minorities, they believe that it doesn't make any difference if they seek help from private or government, because in both situations, communication is going to be a problem. So they rather opt for the cheaper option. So many of them actually tend to come back to government services, medical services that are provided by the government. So we are bound to see them a lot in the hospital authority family. So let's move on to the patient charter in Hong Kong. Now, you know that there is a patient's charter, and regardless of race, religion, sex, etc., all patients have a right to medical treatment. All patients have a right to information. They have a right to choices, right to privacy, and right to complain. And actually, what I want to say is that our hospital authority has been extremely concerned about the rights of patients with special needs, including ethnic minorities. And actually, it has been extremely dedicated to serving ethnic minorities. It has done a lot for ethnic minorities. And actually, all public hospitals generally provide the 4 services that I've listed below. Number 1, they provide interpretation services. Number 2, they provide communication tools in different languages. Number 3, they provide special diets. And number 4, they provide special staff training regarding ethnic minorities. So let's talk about interpretation service. So when we talk about interpretation service, actually, the government has been providing language interpretation services either through service contractors or through part-time court interpreters or volunteers and consulates. And currently, our interpretation services actually covers 19 minority languages. And, you know, pre-COVID era, we could get the translator to come in person to provide the interpretation service for us. But because of COVID, they are mostly accessible by phone, when you call them through the operators. So actually, I have the figure from 2016 to 2017. This interpretation service was actually used more than 12,000 times, which is a significant amount of times, especially considering that most Filipinos, Indonesians, and Caucasians can speak either English or Chinese. So obviously, this 12,000 is mainly being used by other ethnic languages. So despite HA having this provision, I think the most difficult part is who speaks what language, because I feel sometimes our staff gets confused about which languages does which ethnic background speak. Now, we all know that Filipinos, Indonesians, and Caucasians usually speak only like Tagalog, Bahasa, or English. It is in the South Asian community that people usually get more confused about, which language interpreter should I get for them? And actually, most people don't even know which South Asian countries are there. So geography, coming back to geography, there are actually 7 different South Asian countries. And I think majority of people can name 4 out of 7, but I think beyond that, I think you still need to look back to Google or to your geography books. So just having a little bit of sort of a little geography lesson, I would say that there are 7 different South Asian countries. Majority of them also speak just one language, but places like Pakistan or India actually speak multiple languages. So if you just follow these flags and actually request for an interpreter, you may still not be able to communicate with your client, because usually, say for example, you look at the flag for Sri Lanka, you will only get one language, Sinhala, for them. But they may be speaking Tamil, which obviously, if you get Sinhala interpreters for them, you will still not be able to communicate with them. So I think it is very important to ask them what language they speak, and then you can use the service which HA provides more efficiently. Also, the Hong Kong SKH Lady Macclehose Center, which runs the Hong Kong translingual services for our hospital, actually provides yearly talks in various clusters, including like the New Territories West cluster. It even held a talk in Children's Hospital in December 2020. And they provide extremely useful information on the nitsy-gritty on how you can actually, use this interpretation service. And I would actually highly recommend people who have newly joined the Hospital Authority family to actually take part in these talks so that they know how to provide service for their clients. So moving on from interpretation, I'll be talking about communication tools in different languages. And actually, if you go to the business support service department of Hospital Authority, it has many cue cards, consent forms, information sheets, and even like other admission documents in many different languages, easily available to be downloaded. For example, this is the cue sheet for abdominal pain. Now, on one side, you have the Chinese English translation, and on the other side, you have an Urdu English translation. And it's simple questions like, how long have you had the abdominal pain? Do you have diarrhea? Do you have vomiting? And honestly, I think using these cue sheets might be more quicker than even typing out on Google Translate. So I know a lot of doctors are using Google Translate, but if you know that there are many of these cue sheets available, you can utilize them in situations, especially when you're in the middle of the night and you're admitting an ethnic minority patient and you don't have access to translators. Also, many different clusters have the patient's charter, which is also translated in different languages, which can make ethnic minorities aware of their rights in the hospital settings. If you actually go visit the Hospital Authority website as a visitor, there is a section which is on different languages. And if you click on that, it also has 8 languages, and if you click on each of the language, it actually gives you thorough information on GOPD services, on clinic services, on fees and charges, and it also gives you basic information on things like COVID or even visiting hours. And I think it is extremely useful for our staff to direct our patients to these websites so that they can get the appropriate information they need. Apart from that, I personally work in the metabolic field, and we do a lot of work about newborn screening for inborn errors of metabolism. And we have actually translated the information sheet regarding the newborn screening for inborn errors of metabolism in different languages. And so in this way, all babies born in Hong Kong, regardless of their ethnicity, can have an informed consent to whether they would like this newborn screening done. Also, I am aware of different units actually collaborating with NGOs in translating and proofreading material. And you can see that this information has actually been translated by the pediatric unit at Tuen Mun Hospital. And they are very simple daily stuff that nurses need to explain to ethnic minorities, such as how do you clean a aero chamber, or how do you disinfect a milk bottle, which is very basic things, but which are done day in and day out in the pediatric units. And so different people are collaborating with NGOs to do this. At the same time, our very close partner in providing healthcare for ethnic minorities is Department of Health. And if you actually go to their family health service, they also have a lot of information translated in different languages already. And when I say already, I mean like they have a lot of information on child health and on maternal health. And if you look at them, actually they have all the immunization fact sheets available in different languages. They have developmental milestones available in different languages. And when it comes to women's health, they actually have a lot of information on contraception, family planning in different languages. And that's why I think that it's very important that we use everything that is already available. However, despite having such good tools available, there is a problem which arises sometimes, and that is because sometimes our clients cannot read and cannot write. And actually, if you look at the BICensus report, if you look at the Pakistani, Nepalese and Thais, actually, and on an average, 6% of them have never been to school. So if they've never been to school, they cannot read or write. And when we want translators, because they can speak, they're not readily available 24/7. So what do we do in situations like that? So in the situations like that, you have to be extremely innovative. And I'm going to present to you in the next few slides some extremely innovative ways different staff have used to enhance communication with this group of patients when they don't know how to read and write. So in the New Territories West Cluster, in the blood taking or the specimen collection room, they actually have picto cards. So in which basically they have pictures. So even if the patient cannot read or write, just by looking at the simple picture, they know what's coming next or what they're supposed to do. On the other hand, the pediatric department, in collaboration with the IT department of the New Territories West Cluster, actually came up with an iPad app. And this app is extremely useful because it has different languages. What you need to do is you need to input the hospital number of the patient. Once you do that, you give the iPad to the family member. The family member will help you input the immunization history, the TOCC history, and in the end, you can actually print out a proper admission document, which most nurses usually do, and you can actually put it in the clinical notes of the patient. This saves a lot of time in the middle of the night when you can't have access to translators. And this app has actually now a much more upgraded version in which there's also a sound function. So if the patient cannot read or write, if you click the sound button, it will basically speak aloud all the lines for them. And so this is an extremely innovative way to basically improve communication with ethnic minorities, and it targets 3 languages, Nepalese, Pakistanis and Hindis at the moment. And you can see that this program already began over a decade ago. So you can see that people are using innovative ways to communicate with ethnic minorities. Even for concerning newborn screening, apart from just having written material, we also have a video. So if the written material and the video go hand in hand, I think the understanding of these patients is much more with regards to newborn screening. So we came across one mother who didn't know how to read or write, and we needed to provide her with a very, very complicated diet treatment because this child needed to have a very limited amount of protein. So our dietitians used an extremely innovative picture diet sheet for them. And so this is a diet prescription for someone, but without using much words, just using some simple numbers and using some pictures. So you can see that this diet sheet You can see that this diet sheet will tell you that in the daytime at 8 o'clock and at noon, what you're supposed to feed her, and you're supposed to feed her the same thing at night. At the same time, it tells you that when the child falls sick, what you're supposed to do in very simple pictograms. And I think the patients really understand this when we give them this, but it does take a lot of effort on part of our dietitians. On the other hand, when a patient can't read and write, and when you give them medicines, they actually don't know how to comply to it when they go home, because they don't know how much they're supposed to give. So when our general ward nurses at Children's Hospital realized this, they came up with a very innovative way. They took a picture of the bottle of the medicine. They actually drawn out the syringe to tell them how much they're supposed to take. And they even gave them the simple clock to tell them what time they're supposed to take. And this way, even if a patient does not know how to read or write, they know what they're supposed to give their child at what time. And so these are very innovative ways to improve communication with patients. We also came across a patient very recently whose mother did not know how to take the MTR, and she could not come to the hospital because she does not know how to tell the taxi driver Hong Kong Children's Hospital. So our specialty nurses actually made up this very cute card for her and told her, whenever you're coming to the hospital, just show the taxi driver this card, and if there's any difficulty, they can call the nurses. Sorry for listing out their numbers. Call these numbers, and then they can easily tell the taxi driver where to come and how to come. So in this way, we've actually improved communication with different clients using different means. So now you know that there are a lot of communication tools available in different languages and how you can enhance the tools which are already available. Next, I'll be talking about special diets. Now, when it comes to diets, I feel that diets are mainly based on either beliefs or on religion. Majoritarily religion. So if you look at the different ethnic minorities, if you know what religion they belong to, you can easily determine what kind of diet they would prefer. And as you can see, the Indonesians, Bangladeshis and Pakistanis all belong to Islam, which is the religion they follow, and thus they will mostly have halal meat. On the other hand, If you take someone who comes from India, he could belong to many different religions, and thus the meal that he would request for depends on what religion he follows. And that's why it's very important that if someone tells you they're Indian, when you are requesting a meal for them, they don't automatically have a no beef or a vegetarian meal. You need to actually ask them what religion they belong to and what diet would they prefer. Another thing that I commonly see in a hospital setting is that people do not know the difference between halal food and vegetarian food, or they can't differentiate what's the difference. Now, halal simply means forbidden. No, permissible. Sorry, halal means permissible and haram means forbidden. So in Islam, if a food is permissible, it is usually the animals are slaughtered in a certain way, and all of them tend to have a certain certificate attached to them so that they know that this food has been slaughtered in the method which is allowed in their religion. And anything which is pork based, which has blood, which has alcohol, is actually forbidden in Islam. So it is very important that we know these basics before we are ordering food for them. At the same time, you'll ask me, so what does HA provide? And HA is actually extremely good. It does provide you with Western, halal, vegetarian, and no beef options. So, with so many options, and you can see that actually on halal food, usually if we say that the food is halal, they have actually obtained the halal mark and certification from the Hong Kong Islamic Trust Fund Association, and usually the production staff have received relevant training. In certain clusters, they even use haram-free bowl. Now, you may ask me, what is a haram-free bowl? It's basically that bowl has not been used to cook forbidden meat before. So you usually tend to give them plastic bowls instead of giving them other cutlery. So different clusters have different ways to provide halal meal to their clients. We also provide Western and vegetarian options, as you can see. So what may be the difficulty arising when HA is doing such a good job? I think the difficulty arises is that the staff does not know what to order when or how to order when. So I think this is one of the problems we usually face, and I think this problem can be very easily tackled. I mean to say, there are different manuals available in each cluster which actually gives you diet ordering tips or tells you how to learn more about halal foods. And I think if staff is responsible for ordering meals, they should actively go and learn about this so that they are providing their clients with the appropriate diet that they deserve. The other problem which arises from, despite hospital authority providing such lovely facilities for these patients, is that patients do not know what is available, and patients do not know what is in the meals. Now, I'll give you an example. I give you these two meals. Can you tell me what is in them? Can you even tell me whether the chicken is halal or not? So, if you look at the ingredients, actually, the one with the chicken is actually just a Western or a no beef meal. So it's serving pasta instead of rice, and it's serving baked chicken and tomato sauce. And the vegetarian meal is just stewed mushrooms and red dates with veggies and rice. But if I was a patient, I wouldn't know if the soup is chicken broth. So I wouldn't be able to trust what is being provided. So I think there are two ways to settle this problem. Number one, we need to promulgate to patients that we do have such kind of foods available with the appropriate certification. So if we are serving halal food, maybe to very appropriately put up posters in major patient areas so that they know that we have this facility and it is undergoing proper under the Islamic law and everything. The second one is, if patients do not know what is in the meals, perhaps we need to design some menu cards for special meals, and that may easily help the problem, and it may even carry forward all the good work that we've been doing or our catering service has been doing. The other thing why it is important, so, normally when patients don't know what is available, and I know that a lot of Muslim patients have told me that because they are not sure if the meat is halal or not, they tend to choose vegetarian options because they just think that's easier, that's safer. But actually ordering just vegetarian meals is not the solution, especially for chronic cases, because it would mean inadequate nutrition, or if you're going to feed a diabetic patient with just carbohydrates instead of proper meat, that's not going to work in the long run. And sometimes vegetarian meals may also have some hidden forbidden food, such as gelatin, animal starch, and chicken broth. So I think it's very important that we promulgate to the patients that we are serving halal food and that it is very legitimate. So after talking about special diets, let's talk about staff training. Now, actually, HA has a lot of online e-learning courses with a lot of animated training videos, and which is very easily accessible to our frontline staff. And basically, these e-learning courses aims to increase awareness of staff with regards to ethnic minorities. And they have extremely rich content because they are introducing you to the interpretation service, they are introducing you to the minorities and the languages they speak, they will remind you of the racial discrimination ordinance, and they will also tell you the differences in different cultures, and they will tell you what is appropriate in what culture and what is not. However, these e-learning courses are of course not compulsory, and so that's why we still see that when I deal with a lot of healthcare providers, they still can't differentiate different religions and practices and beliefs. So I'm going to take a few slides to actually try to explain different religions and cultures at a glance. So the three main religions that I'm going to talk about is Islam, Hinduism, and Sikhism. So when we talk about Islam, I think a majority of you know that there's a specific dress code for women. So that different women tend to fully cover themselves. They are not supposed to show their hair, their arms, or their legs. And usually men are also covered, pretty much very much covered. And this is part of their religious belief. But what this makes them prone to is this makes them very prone to vitamin D deficiency. And actually, in Australia, every Muslim patient that comes in is given a mega dose of vitamin D because they know even without checking that they will be vitamin D deficient. On the other hand, we also know that men in Islam are allowed to have 4 marriages. Of course, it is not the case in Hong Kong, but sometimes these men may have wives back in Pakistan or in Middle East, so this may not just be one wife that they have, the one here in Hong Kong. The other thing which is very common in Islam is consanguineous marriages are very common. So you tend to see a lot of rare disorders for people belonging to the Islam faith. Now, I also feel that one thing we can do is to be more culturally sensitive is when we can call a patient by his appropriate name. So I feel that many people do not know how to interpret Muslim, Hindu, or Sikh names. And actually, in Islam, there is no first name, no middle name, and no last name. Actually, the names are just a chain of names. So they tend to have a personal name, and then they tend to have a religious title, which is chosen from one of the 99 names of God. Then they tend to have the order of birth. So Abu Karim means firstborn, like Abu means first. And then they tend to have their father or their grandfather's name. Then they tend to have the character of the person. And then they tend to have the person's occupation or geographical location. So if I give you an example, we can start with the bottom one because it's the easiest. So this is Osama bin Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden. So his personal name is just Osama. All these are just his grandfather's names, and this is his father's name. So there's no real surname. If you look at this option, this is a little bit more difficult. If you look at Abdul Rahman bin Omar al-Ahmed, so again, there's no surname. Abdul is just God's name, Rahman is his actual name, bin Omar is his father's name, and Al-Ahmad is basically the geographical location of the family in the Middle East. So if you just call him Rahman, that is not right. If you just call him Abdul, that's also not right. So I think it's important to call him Abdul Rahman. So I think that it's very important to know how to address a person if you want to develop a good relationship with them. When it comes to women, actually, we see a lot of Bibis and a lot of Begums, and people tend to think that is their surname, but actually it just means Miss or Mrs. So it doesn't really mean anything. So normally you just see women having names such as Bibi, Sobia, and it just means Miss Sobia. It doesn't have any surname, any middle name attached to it. So if you know that, you'll be able to address them better. So there are a lot of do's and don'ts in Islam. So because Islam is a fairly conservative religion, so we normally say that a female patient would generally prefer a female doctor. If you could order halal food for them, that would be fantastic. They usually tend to need to pray 5 times in a day. And so, if you could provide them with a praying space, that would be very nice. Friday is a special religious day for them, just like Jews. And so if you could avoid follow-up on Friday, that would be actually quite ideal for them. And in Islam, there's a fasting month every year, and it's called Ramadan. And I'm sure even when we are fasting, we want to avoid all sorts of procedures and follow-ups. And so if we could avoid procedures and follow-ups during that period, unless it's an emergency, I think they would really appreciate that quite a bit. And also they tend to have specific death customs, such as the body needs to face Mecca, they need to sprinkle holy water on them, and the burial needs to take place within 24 hours. So the don'ts is that, especially for gynecological cases, I think Pakistani women would prefer a female doctor. Don't ever give them non-halal food. And even previously, medications used to have some ingredients, like when insulin used to be made in the olden days using some part of the swine, that was considered forbidden. But now this is not the case in today's day and age. And the other thing is that they do not appreciate termination of pregnancy. So if they do have rare conditions in them and they do agree to termination of pregnancy, I would advise it to have the termination of pregnancy arranged as soon as possible. Because once the baby becomes above 12 weeks of gestation, they actually are very against termination of pregnancy. Yeah. So I spoke about Islam, and I'll talk about Hindu. Okay, so in Hinduism, I am a Hindu. We worship multiple gods. We have a lot of festivals, and a lot of festivals is marked by a lot of religious sweets. So we need to tell these patients, especially who are obese, who have diabetes, to really control their sweets when they are having religious festivals. Mostly our food is vegetarian, or some don't eat beef, depending on how conservative they are. People usually tend to wear a lot of protective jewelry, so they usually tend to have a lot of black threads or gold chains or something of that sort, which is considered quite protective. Their names are first name, middle name, and last name. And so I will tell you my name. Kiran, Moti, Belaramani is my name. Kiran is my personal name. Moti is my father's name, and Belaramani is my surname. In Hindus, after marriage, a woman changes her name completely. So her first name will also change. Her middle name will become her husband's name, and her last name will become her husband's surname. So I have a lot of childhood friends who actually search me on social media, and I don't know who they are because their name has completely changed until I don't look at the picture. So sometimes when your patients become adults, their names may have completely changed and you will not be able to trace them back. And Hindus are usually cremated, and they're not buried when they die. So Sikhism. Now, many people tend to get very confused between Hinduism and Sikhism. Now, Sikhism is a religion which comes from the north of India, from Punjab, and usually they tend to follow the 5 Ks. So it is a K in Hindi, but in English it's hair, comb, underwear, bangle, and knife. So they basically all tend to have very long hair. So the men usually tend to have turbans. They tend to carry a comb, a bangle, and a knife with them at all times to protect themselves. And they are they believe a lot in cleanliness. So they believe in bathing and wearing an underwear at all cost. So their names are usually Singh, which actually means lion, and Kaur, which actually means princess. So Kaur is usually for women and Singh is usually for men. And usually they are cremated when they die. So basically for Sikhism, I think the biggest don'ts is that they don't like to be separated from the 5 Ks unless they are bathing. So if they could be allowed to carry them with them, I mean, if they're carrying a small knife, it's not to injure staff, but it's just part of their religion. And if we understand that, I think they would be quite appreciative. So now that we know our ethnic minorities that we're dealing with, we know what is available in HA, and we know a little bit about their culture and traditional practices, how can we further improve services for them? So I think, if you want to further improve services for them, we need to be very creative, and we really need to take the extra mile. So I think there are a few things. Like I said, there are so many things available in HA. The first thing we need to do is we need to raise staff awareness, and we need to have extremely easy access to information. This is very important. The second thing we really need to do is we need to cater to special needs and customs more formally than we are currently doing. The third thing we need to do is, if after doing so much for these patients, if we cannot engage ethnic minorities, then we are actually at a total loss. So let's talk about raising staff awareness and ease of access to information. So I'll be talking to you about what the NTWS cluster has done. For many, many years, it has come up with something called the Ethnic Minority Calendar. So they have actually come up with this calendar in collaboration with the Hong Kong Christian Services, which marks festival in India, Nepal, and Pakistan. And it basically is to assist colleagues to make appointments for these patients. Now, these calendars are attached on every outpatient clinic boards, like in the rooms, and also in the radiology departments and different departments making different meetings. So if they can look at this calendar and they know it's the month of Ramadan, they will avoid all sort of procedures during that time. Now, having this calendar will reduce the default rate, will definitely improve patient satisfaction, and will reduce rescheduling work. So it is an extremely good initiative that they have done. The second one is we need to have easy access to information. So if you look at the Children's Hospital website, if you go on the General Administration and Interpretation Service, actually they have a lot of information there, which actually tells you about how to book interpretation service, and it even has links to basically the translated documents which are available for HA. Similarly, in the NTWS cluster, there is an ethnic minority corner which basically has all the information under one roof. So you can see even they have the ethnic minority calendar there, they have all the spiritual and cultural support for these clients, and so they essentially have all the information under one roof, so the staff can easily access it. For those who are not so tech savvy, they also have a board in the major staff area, so that those staff who are not so tech savvy can refer to that if they want to provide care for ethnic minorities. So after we talked about what we can do to raise staff awareness, now it's about taking the extra mile. Now, I think when a person is in the hospital, it is very important for them to cater to the spiritual needs, like whether if they are dying, if someone is born, or if somebody is severely ill. So I have seen various hospitals take different initiatives. Now, I know Castle Peak Hospital, on their ceilings, they have actually put up a sticker of a compass, because Muslims tend to face Mecca when they pray 5 times in a day, and having this compass will help it. So it's a very small thing to do, but it is to raise cultural sensitivity. On the other hand, Castle Peak Hospital has also developed link persons for Islam and Hindus. So just like we do have Christian Catholic chaplaincy services in majority of hospitals, they even have developed spiritual link person for Hindus and Islam. So that basically caters to the spiritual needs of these patients. Providing prayer rooms. Now, I do know that a prayer room is in the design of the Hong Kong Children's Hospital. I know it's not ready yet, but I do know that eventually that is the plan. And I think this having a prayer room will also cater to the spiritual needs of patients. So I think that when someone is dying, different religions have different cultures. And I know that the Muslims, the faith stipulates that the dead must face Mecca and must be buried as soon as possible. So I think we need to set up a work process to handle the request of the family as early as possible. And actually, if you look at the ethnic minority corner that I mentioned in the NTWS cluster, they have all these workflow in place already. Now, when you look at Hong Kong Children's Hospital, if you undergo clinical departments under palliative care, they have the same information available as well. And actually, under the last office's document, Hong Kong Children's Hospital, they actually have a section on immediate removal case, and both they provide you information on what to do if the situation has arrived both after and during office hours. So I think it's very important to set up more of these systems. Also, at the Hong Kong Children's Hospital, the mortuary at Hong Kong Children's Hospital actually has a ceremony room to allow people to perform their last rituals, and it has a compass in place because the body needs to face Mecca. So that is being extremely culturally sensitive. So I also know when babies are born, both in Hindus and Muslims, and so Nepalese and Pakistanis and Indians, they tend to have a lot of customs that are done in different days after the baby is born. And certain days, like the 7th day or the 10th day, is extremely important. And I think that if we would have flexible visiting after the COVID era, it might actually help them a lot, because I think these little festivals mean a lot to them. Okay, so after I've spoken about catering to special needs and raising staff awareness, how do we engage the people who we are actually doing so much for? And I think to engage them, first of all, we need to make them aware. So I think it is very, very important to translate and display medical information in different languages in very prominent areas of the hospitals. So say when we are admitting patients, or in OPDs, or inside OPDs, or outside the pharmacies, it is very important, like say we have availability of halal food, we have availability of interpretation services, or we have availability of prayer rooms. I think if we make them aware, they will know what is available. So I think this is one way to kind of communicate with them and engage them. The second way is to know our community partners. I think there are many, many community partners who are willing to help, and this includes our social workers at the hospital, social workers outside hospitals, patient resource centers or community service centers, and the NGOs. Now, there's a list of NGOs which is actually available on the Hong Kong government website as well, which really work together with ethnic minorities. And they not only provide us with translation or telephone interpretation service, but they can even help with translating and proofreading documents. They can even help with counseling. They can even help with bringing these patients to help them use public services. And so if we know them and we work very closely with them, they are extremely helpful. Now, I know that in Children's Hospital itself, the Playwright actually has an ethnic minority program in which they do provide play service and caregiver support to ethnic minority children. So once you know your community partners, you can actually do a lot with them. You can actually collaborate with your community partners to organize health seminars or simple health checks. I do know that the Hong Kong Children's Hospital actually held an ethnic minority tour of the hospital in 2019 summer to introduce the service to the ethnic minority population and what Hong Kong Children's Hospital provides. Similarly, I know Castle Peak hospitals have a booth at open days in different ethnic minority centers. I also know Department of Surgeries have yearly talks on colorectal cancer or urinary calculus in different clusters. At the same time, I know that Poi Hospital has had many health seminars yearly catered to Nepalese and Pakistanis. And this is actually Dr. Ong, who is currently the chairperson of the committee serving diverse ethnicities in the NT West cluster. And as you can see, if you collaborate with them, you can achieve a lot. This is my group of patients, and honestly, I am a Hindu, and I have come across many, many, many Nepalese and many, many Muslim patients. And working with them, I have learned a lot about their religions and their cultures. And I'm very happy to say that today I know so much about them that I'm hoping to further improve care for them. So I think to conclude my lecture, I would like to say is that it is extremely important to be curious, know your client. It is extremely important to be communicative. There are many other ways than language to communicate with patients. Be considerate towards other people's traditions and religious practices. Be creative. Small changes can make huge differences to their lives. And be collaborative, because a lot of people are actually trying to do the same thing. Together we'll achieve more. And so that concludes my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, 唔該晒 Dr. Kiran。 咁我哋而家咧都可以收一啲question and answer 嘅時間啦。如果各位有問題想問 Dr. Kiran 都可以 key in 喺個 Zoom 度啦。咁我哋都而家有啲問題嘅。咁有一位同事就問啦，咁佢打英文啦嚇。如果嗰個啲 ethnic minorities 對我哋冇 trust 啦嚇，咁或者medical team 都唔係好知道佢哋嘅需要嘅時候，咁我哋點樣可以 overcome 呢個 difficulty 呢？
我覺得咧係第一，我都話咧係因為佢哋唔 aware 我哋做緊咁多嘢嘅，先我覺得係最緊要咧都係 raise 佢哋嘅 awareness， 但我哋真係咧想幫佢哋嘅。只係 apart from raise 佢哋嘅 awareness， 我哋要 raise 我哋嘅 staff 嘅 awareness 嘅，係啦，因為我覺得係 is goes hand in hand 嘅。先如果佢哋知道，哇，原來我哋有 interpretation service， 我哋有 halal food， 我哋有乜乜乜，之後佢哋都會覺得我哋做緊咁多，先佢哋會開始 trust 我哋多啲，係啦。之後第二，我覺得係又係 medical staff， 如果佢哋都識分，哦，原來你係 Muslim 啊，你係食 halal food 啦，先佢哋會知道，哇，佢都已經係有興趣對我嘅文化，先佢哋都會開始會 develop 個 trust 嘅，先我覺得係 two way 嘅。係啊，
即係都唔係一嚟就係講我哋嘅需要俾佢哋知，或者要求俾佢聽。即係首先要了解咗佢哋嘅文化，同埋俾到信心，就係我哋都知少少啦，唔可以話多啦。係就我哋都想尊重你哋嘅文化先，咁大家先有個 trust 啦。係，即係兩方面啦。係好。咁另外咧就呢一個就問 pram babies，
或者等我問啦。
係。
因為呢個比較 medical 嘅問題，佢話咧我哋喺啲唔足月嘅 BB 咧，我哋有時會俾啲叫 surfactant 啦嚇。咁咧佢話有啲 surfactant 咧係來自豬嘅。
係。
咁可唔可以俾啲 Islamic 嘅 religious嘅人咧咁樣
？Strictly speaking 咧，我覺得係 depends on 佢哋係幾 religious 嘅。先我覺得咧係如果揀到一個 surfactant 嘅 option 係冇 pig 係最好啦。不過有啲人係比較 religious 啲，有啲人係冇咁 religious。先我覺得要同佢哋傾係好啲嘅。係啊，因為你唔想，因為 it same like Jehovah's Witness 啊嘛。先你要同佢傾嗰個急嗰個情況係幾急，同埋唔俾有咩效果會好啲嘅。
非常好。咁暫時冇問題咧，我又想講下啲我經歷過嘅故事啦嚇。咁10幾年前咧就有一個 patient 咧就係 osteogenesis imperfecta， 就巴基斯坦嘅小朋友嚟嘅。咁即係 consanguineous 嘅 marriage 啦咁樣。咁我由10幾週開始睇佢，嗰時細個啦，我自己都覺得自己好 junior。講錯一句説話，咁話咦你下一胎點啊？咁樣會唔會考慮 termination？ 就係頭先你講嗰樣啦，即係其實就唔應該講嘅，我覺得呢樣嘢。咁嗰次之後我都覺得佢唔係幾 trust 我哋嘅嚇，因為真係唔應該講嘅。咁但係後尾我哋又感染咗佢啊！佢一出世當然好多問題啦，即係啲 ribs 又斷晒咁樣。咁我哋又唔係好知點打理佢啦。咁就好似頭先咁講，嗰時冇咁多電腦啦，我哋全部用啲 picture cast 咁教佢，全部 body language。咁就個小朋友慢慢大出院啊咁樣。咁相處得好好嘅，即係佢同醫生啊同護士咧相處得好好。即係我覺得我哋冇啲嘢咧，佢哋唔明嘅，或者佢有嘢咧可以解到俾我哋聽。咁過咗我諗5-6年咧，突然間我 OPD 撞到佢喎，哇嚇！你又再嚟咁樣？佢話唔係啊，我今次嚟做 interpreter 咁樣，即係幫佢啲同鄉咧，就想即係做翻譯。咁我覺得呢個故事，我覺得好開心嘅，因為咧原來咧佢開頭一句説話、一句廣東話都溝通唔到，對後尾咧佢學到講廣東話，跟住咧幫翻佢自己同鄉。咁我覺得呢個好好。咁所以我覺得即係個世界第一就應該唔好話佢而家唔識就一世都唔識。佢其實會融入我哋嘅社會，甚至乎咧佢會幫到即係其他嘅同事都唔定嚇。好啦，咁我拉布完畢咧，又有個問題。
咁有位醫生問咧，我哋點樣 approach 得好啲？如果傾 DNA CPR 嘅時候 with ethnic minorities？
嗱，我覺得咧，如果係要傾咁複雜嘅嘢啦，係我自己覺得咧係如果有一個 in person 嘅 translator 啦，係好好嘅。同埋我自己嘅經驗咧，有啲 translator 啦，因為你知道嗰啲 services 都係嗰紮 translator，有啲 translator 真係咧係好好嘅。之後不過我都自己都知道咧，係如果你睇到 Islam 咧，佢哋係好 trust 一個醫生，即係佢哋會覺得係我信你啦。你會同我點講，我會點講咁樣嘅。即係我覺得咧，如果你同佢講咧，嗰個小朋友咧係真係會 suffer 啦嗰啲，之後佢會話好，醫生你盡晒力啦，我信你啦。之後如果要過晒身咪過身，不過你要同佢問佢哋有冇 last wish， 有冇啲 last 嘅 religious rites。rituals 佢哋想 perform，如果你同佢講呢啲咧，我覺得佢哋會開心啲咁樣嘅，係啊。先我覺得 actually DNA CPR with ethnic minority 我冇特別經過好大嘅困難，因為佢哋都幾 accepting 咁樣嘅。
呢個係咪問緊啲 COVID
或者我問啦，我呢度易睇啲。佢話咧就有冇啲 formal 嘅 information about the ethnic minority community think about HADH service 咁佢話即係點解咁問呢？就因為最近都好似有啲 negative 嘅 publicity about 呢個 COVID 嘅 contact tracing 咁樣。
我可以答第一個問題啦。之後咧，我都知咧係博愛醫院嗰邊咧，佢哋都會做一個 sort of ethnic minority 嘅 small group 嘅 survey， 即係佢哋都做過，之後同 ethnic minority 做啲 questionnaire 同埋 one on one， 例如一個 small group 問過你覺得我哋 provide 緊啲 service 係點樣啊？點樣可以進步啊？嗰啲咁樣嘅。先如果你話有冇人做緊，我都知有人做過咁樣嘅，之後嗰個 feedback 都係幾好咁樣嘅。之後我都知係一啲 West Cluster 係最出名係做呢啲sort of more work on ethnic minorities。之後如果你話咧係 what does the ethnic minority community think about 嗰個 recent COVID-19 啦，之後我覺得係我自己有好多 friend 啦，都係好多 ethnic minority 啦，之後我覺得係有啲人係都明白嘅。不過我覺得好多嗰啲例如 especially the community we are talking about 啦，佢哋咧係唔係好識太多嘢嘅。之後我而家覺得政府做咗好多嘢啦，好多 translated material 突然間出現嘅。But I think if all these translated materials were available maybe 1 year ago, that would have been much better 咁樣嘅。
頭先我哋個節目未開始之前呢，即係 Lunch News 都講啊，就話咧即係其實咧尤其是啲婦女咧 ethnic minority 啲婦女咧，即係佢哋個 education level 比較低啦，同埋佢哋主要都喺屋企入邊，咁咧佢就冇機會接觸呢啲。咁我諗今次即係都講得，今次 COVID 咧都係一個好嘅 inspiration 俾大家。即係有時我哋都要 reach out to 佢哋嚇，即係 pull 唔得嘅，有時要 push 俾佢哋先得。咁咧先至即係將啲信息帶到佢嗰度。咁今次大家都明白啦，即係頭先阿 Kiran 嚟嗰時都話：咦，點解我哋揀個日子咁巧嘅咧？啱啱呢排咁多新聞，咁啊真係唔係揀嘅嚇，即係排咗好耐㗎啦。咁因為我哋都覺得重要，咁但係即係唔係今日都係將來都一段時間會發生呢啲事。咁我覺得即係要包容啦。我上個禮拜都講啦，要 inclusive 啦。咁呢個唔係 luxury 嘅包容。今次咧就證明到呢個係一個好重要嘅嘢，即係你唔 include 佢哋咧，就會出好多問題。咁即係油尖旺嗰度大家睇到啦，即係都幾論盡嚇。
好，另外呢個就問呢，頭先你介紹嗰個 iPad 嗰個 program 呢，如果喺 private practice 度點樣可以？
我估要揾 IT 整一個 app 咁樣嘅，因為我都知係嗰個Anti-West Cluster 嘅 IT team 咧，都用咗好多時間，因為要好多 proofread、好多 translation， 之後佢哋同 NGOs work hard， 之後真係整出嚟呢個 iPad 嘅，之後佢哋係嗰個 copyright 嘅，我估係啊，先我估未必係你要 private 要自己申請咁樣嘅，不過都係幾好一個 option 嘅。
或者用後我睇下同阿 Kiran 傾一傾，睇下佢哋有冇 一個意願想同其他同事 share 啦。即係如果
OK 可以嘅，可以嘅，
因為
係啊，
我諗佢哋整出嚟都係想幫到啲 ethnic
係啊
minority 咁。
係啊
如果有，我哋睇下可以用點樣做法。我諗呢個好有意思，我頭先睇落，我覺得好好啊呢個。
係啊係啊係啊係啊係啊，
同埋好 innovative 啊！我覺得
係啊係啊係啊，真係好 innovative 嘅。
好，另外呢個就問呢，如果即係有需要做 postmortem exam，可能啲 forensic 啦，咁如果個body 要 bury 喺24小時呢，咁點樣處理呢？
Actually 咧，我自己呢個係我自己 personal experience 啦，係 Muslims 咧係好 accepting of God's wish 嘅。先如果佢哋覺得嗰個小朋友死咗啦，好多次佢哋未必會 push 你係嗰個原因，同埋如果下一次再發生，佢哋都會好多次都 accept as God's wish 嘅。即係我覺得好多次佢哋都唔想知道點解，因為佢哋第一佢哋嘅medical language 佢哋嘅 medical sort of literacy 都係好 basic 嘅，先好多次佢哋唔會明白，例如你做咗咁複雜嘅 test，佢哋都唔明點解要做，佢哋覺得呢啲係 God's wish，佢哋會好 accept 嘅，先佢哋覺得如果你真係想同佢講想做 postmortem 咧，要好小心，同埋嗰啲好 educated 嗰啲明白嗰啲人會真係覺得想做嘅。不過嗰啲係好 limited education background，佢哋會覺得係冇用嘅。係呢個係我自己嘅 experience 嘅，好多次我都 convince 唔到佢哋做嘅，先我都知道呢個問題嘅。
咁頭先你講個 prayer room 咧，就我都好有感受嘅。因為最近都聽到啦，其實呢一兩年咧就係原來我哋有啲伊斯蘭嘅父母嘅，佢即係我哋都個都經歷過，佢哋咧就真係好需要祈禱嘅。咁有啲嘢我哋都忽略咗嘅。點解你走咗喺樓梯中間嗰度祈禱咧？其實我哋呢個病房好寬敞啊，走廊好寬敞，點解你唔去咧？咁樣原來佢哋話咧，即係唔可以見到啲 figures， 即係動物嘅 figures 啊。係。咁我又覺得我又學多咗一樣嘢，但係頭先聽你講咧話，其實我哋兒童醫院 prayer room 咧，我都有份俾 input 嘅。我覺得好緊要。喺 design 嗰陣時，我哋都用咗好多時間去傾，同埋我哋都好滿意個結果，因為嗰度其實都係 religion neutral。但係我頭先聽你講話，我哋而家都未用，我就覺得好有啲失望。咁我希望即係可以快啲用啦，同埋大家都要 respect 佢哋嗰個 religious 嗰個 preference， 係應該 facilitate 佢哋，喺佢嚟講好重要嘅即係可以祈禱啊咁樣。
不過有啲時唔係一個 room， 你俾佢一個 small space 都 OK 嘅，係啊，我覺得佢哋唔係好高嘅要求嘅 actually。
咁好過喺樓梯中間咯，我覺得嚇。仲有一條問題？
仲有冇？
冇啦。
好，咁我哋今日時間都差唔多啦。咁都好多謝 Dr. Kiran 啦，教咗我哋好多啲知識嗰啲名，我成日都睇佢哋嗰啲名係金 label，真係唔識得分。同埋即係你叫錯佢咧，即係已經大打折扣啦個印象個 trust 嘅。我覺得呢個都好好，我哋第一次學下呢個名。咁我哋今日就要有個紀念品送翻俾 Dr. Kiran 嘅。咁你係咪 Dr. Chan 你會過嚟？好，咁我就代佢先生咧。咁多謝 Dr.
Thank you so much，
真係好多謝你。
Thank you，Thank you so much。
咁咧好多謝 Kiran。咁咧呢個我等咗好耐，我好想佢講呢個題目。咁講得非常非常之好，即係學到好多嘢。第二我要多謝 Carrie 啦我 WhatsApp 佢話你可唔可以幫我做 moderator？ 佢二話不說得。咁原來佢真係好認真嘅。頭先 Kiran 話佢琴晚兩個咧已經要夾過講乜嘢啊咁樣。咁我最 respect 啲同事咧即係好尊重嗰個工作。咁阿 Carrie 就係即係其中一個嚇。咁我哋都好尊重我哋呢個時段嘅，所以頭先咧。未開場之前呢，我播咗一個好短5分幾鐘嘅 video。有啲同事睇過，有啲同事未睇過啦。係Joe Biden inauguration， 其實係最嬲尾嗰個時段，咁好多人都瞓咗覺。咁就叫 The Hill We Climb。咁呢個22歲嘅女詩人呢，我覺得佢第一佢寫得好好，第二呢，我覺得佢講得好好。咁頭先我哋傾偈就話佢生出嚟已經咁叻。咁原來咧，我知道有啲小道消息咧，原來佢開頭咧讀唔到個 R 音嘅，佢用咗好多心機去 train 自己。咁呢啲故事咧，我諗係好 positive。 如果大家有時間可以上網睇翻The Hill We Climb， 咁係一個好 positive、好 encouraging 嘅演說嚟嘅。咁我希望喺啲咁多負面嘅消息當中，都大家有翻啲正能量咁樣樣。咁好啦，咁今日就好多謝兩位啦。下禮拜有預告就講一個好重要嘅話題，就 SMA 啦。喺1-2年之前或者唔知2年前咧，呢個係一個大新聞嚟嘅喺醫療界，尤其是 pediatrics 咧。咁下禮拜就星期二啦，Sophia 就會上嚟講 SMA 嘅 treatment 咁到時請大家留意收睇啦。咁今日多謝各位，好，拜拜。